These are some of the earliest concept arts of Dispatch, the single most important game in the entire history of the studio behind the game, Ad Hoc Studios. Made up of the incredible talent from the ashes of Telltale Games, the studio was originally going to work in multimedia spaces like live-action TV shows. Dispatch's origin in 2018 was a live-action superhero workplace comedy, but quickly evolved into a newer modern spin of the classic Telltale games from the 2010s. The upbringing of the studio behind this game is one that we've seen happening all across the gaming industry this year that has dramatically altered the course of the future of gaming forever, and this game is no exception. The fall of AAA gaming gave birth to yet another studio who was driven by passion and not profits. This is the story of Dispatch and how a brand new studio built from the ground up completely rejuvenated the long abandoned genre. In 2018, Telltale Games were on the brink of collapse. Telltale took on numerous expensive licenses like Game of Thrones, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Batman. But many of their games, with the exception of the early Walking Dead seasons, didn't even come close to bringing in enough revenue to cover the high cost of production and licensing. The company pursued a strategy of rapid expansion, simultaneously developing many episodic series in order to keep the lights on. Within the span of 2 years, the studio had shipped over 9 different games.
That's actually not water.
A report from The Verge alleges that Telltale operated under a culture of heavy expected crunch pushed by management teams. Employees were routinely expected to work extremely long hours, sometimes up to 18 hours a day, for weeks on end, to meet the aggressive production schedules necessary for releasing multiple episodic games simultaneously. The company grew too fast and took on too many licensed projects, which ultimately created a machine that could not be sustainable financially or operationally. As the studio was faced with extreme internal pressures back in early 2017, 3 key members responsible for the successes behind some of Telltale's best franchises saw the writing on the wall, citing frustration with the creative stagnation and toxic culture. This studio was about to explode and completely shut down, and they needed to get out while they still could. All 3 would leave at the same time and subsequently join Ubisoft in their San Francisco office working on narrative adjacent games like South Park, but they also wanted to start their own studio within Ubisoft and have full creative control behind it. However, Ubisoft wasn't really receptive to this approach of forming a new studio. They had left one studio due to creative stagnation, only to be met with resistance to forming something completely new under Ubisoft, one that would allow them to operate with full creative freedom and do what they do best, making games. And if this sounds very familiar, it's because this isn't the first time that Ubisoft did this. The creators of Expedition 33 left Ubisoft due to the same exact reason, word for word. And it wouldn't take long for our ex-Telltale Dream Team to follow suit. After only 1 year at Ubisoft, the Telltale veterans would leave and form their own studio, Ad Hoc Studio, in early 2018. Ad Hoc was founded with the stated intention of continuing the legacy of narrative-focused titles that the original Telltale games had pioneered. The 4 founders, Michael Chong, Nick Herman, Dennis Leonard, and Pierre Charette, quickly began brainstorming ideas of how they could push the genre to the next level. They were absolutely inspired from works like Netflix's Bandersnatch, and hinted that their first project would be an interactive live-action experience that blurred the lines between film, television, and games, similar to Bandersnatch. September 21st, 2018. Telltale announced a major studio closure. The company laid off approximately 225 to 250 employees, or around 90% of its staff, without warning. Employees were given 30 minutes to vacate the building. They received no severance pay. Ad hoc studios and the creative drivers were safe, but over 200 employees had lost their jobs in quite possibly the most abrupt studio closure of all time. The genre that Telltale had pioneered up until this point had completely collapsed. So, how does Ad Hoc Studio continue the legacy of Telltale? Where do they even start? But before I move on to the next chapter, if you're enjoying this content thus far, it would mean a lot if you subscribe to the channel. If the legendary Actman can do it, you can too. In 2019, Ad Hoc Studio was full steam ahead on their first project, an interactive live-action project. Their vision was to make what we now know as Dispatch, but with actors, sets, and a full show's production cycle. They had begun working on this project extensively throughout 2019. Meanwhile, what remained of Telltale was bought up by a Californian-based company called LCG Entertainment. The new Telltale wanted to work on new games based on Telltale-affiliated properties. While licenses for games and planned games like The Walking Dead and Stranger Things have since reverted back to their original owners, the new Telltale retained licenses for their own original IPs like The Wolf Among Us. But going back to Ad Hoc Studio for a moment, while they were working on their live-action project, they were approached by the new Telltale, asking to be contracted for their first release under new management. And since Ad Hoc Studio was partially founded by the creatives behind the first episode of The Wolf Among Us, the new Telltale Games approached the team to help them make a sequel. Of course, Ad Hoc said yes, since it meant their new small studio would receive funding to continue their live-action project, and since they all worked on The Wolf Among Us already, they were all very excited to return to the world. Telltale and Ad Hoc inked a deal, with an announcement of the new game in 2019, with Ad Hoc specifically working on narrative and cinematic elements for The Wolf Among Us 2, which was set to release in 2023. This will be very important later, so be sure to remember this. Great. Now Ad Hoc had two projects they were working on. One that they had been intimately familiar with during their time at old school Telltale, and one that is something they've dreamt about working on. Things were getting exciting at the studio. However, in early 2020, as production on their own franchise was about to begin, the pandemic hit and completely shut down all production on their live-action series. Due to the pandemic completely shutting down film and TV production, they had no choice but to shelf the entire project indefinitely. Looking back at this, Ad Hoc co-founder Nick Herman said that the shelving of the project was a blessing in disguise. "You're asking a bunch of game devs to shoot a TV show," he said. "It would have been a fun failure." The studio moved on to The Wolf Among Us 2 after that, in a work-for-hire capacity, and would be for the next 2 years. Since the game was scheduled to be released in 2023, Ad Hoc made sure that their work on narrative and cinematic elements would be well ahead of the targeted release time. 2 years of developing The Wolf Among Us 2 went by, and then all of a sudden, radio silence. Nothing from Telltale or Ad Hoc on what was going on with the project. Well, it turns out that the game was delayed indefinitely in an effort to avoid crunch. We weren't running the project, it was Telltale we were doing it in partnership with, and we couldn't wait around and do nothing. It turns out that Ad Hoc had finished their contracted work, but didn't have any control of anything else on the game beyond that. During the stagnation of work on The Wolf Among Us 2, They slowly began to revisit their shelved project since they had to keep the studio up and running. Ad Hoc took the foundational narrative work from their shelved project and reworked it into what we now know as Dispatch. Without worrying about the live action media side, they can work on what they've done best: narrative, story driven games. So, they began staffing up. They had a concrete vision for the game now and needed the firepower to get the project across the finish line. From 2021 onward, it was all about Dispatch and ensuring that the game received the full attention of the nascent gaming studio going forward.
Just be careful, kid. The answers are out there if you just listen to the wind.
After determining that they could not wait for the revived Telltale to be ready to continue their work on The Wolf Among Us 2, Ad Hoc fully dedicated its team to converting the live-action script for Dispatch into a fully animated game. The concept evolved into a game built on Unreal Engine 4. This period of development was dedicated to the core production, animation, and voice recording necessary for the branching narratives. And they really went all out with the voice acting in this game. Let me just take a moment to go through the cast they managed to pull together for this game. It's a bit wild. Aaron Paul as Robert Robertson, Jeffrey Wright as Chase, Laura Bailey as Invisigal, Young Gravy as Golem, and even the biggest actor of all time. You may have recognized him from his leading role in The Hunger Games, Moist Critical as Sonar.
You gonna eat those Twinks?
That's not what they're... You know what? Help yourself.
And the list goes on and on. Every single voice actor in this game is very well decorated and puts their all into their respective roles. But regardless, the team was hard at work on this game. By 2024, they would secure a spot at the Game Awards to finally reveal their hard work. And what better way to announce the game than with some of the insane cast members?
Here is the world premiere trailer for the game Laura and I worked on separately together.
After this point, the game was almost ready to go, but there was one more critical, no pun intended, partner that wanted to be part of this new world: Critical Role Productions. Critical Role Productions is a multimedia production company founded in 2015 by the members of the creator-owned streaming show Critical Role, which features a group of professional voice actors playing the tabletop game Dungeons & Dragons. Now, why would Critical Role want to be part of this game and Ad Hoc Studios? Well, Critical Role had seen some massive success with their tabletop sets and have expanded their reach by creating the animated show Vox Machina, based off of one of their campaigns. They want to do the same thing with the Dispatch universe and expand it to other forms of media. And since Critical Role Productions related media always has professional voice actors within their episodes, in return, Ad Hoc would develop their first video game set in the Critical Role universe. But going back to Dispatch, following the 2024 Game Awards reveal, Dispatch would launch in late 2025 to critical acclaim. The new studio managed to sell over 1 million copies within 10 days, and we haven't even finished the game yet. As of writing this script, there are still 2 more episodes set to release later this month, but all signs point towards the game and the studio having a hit on their hands. From the troubled history with Telltale Games and its complete collapse, to having to shelf their passion project due to COVID, to going back to helping Telltale Games and everything in between, the story of this studio is very convoluted. But in the end, they managed to release a return to form for the interactive storytelling genre, and in my opinion, reboot the entire Telltale-esque genre with fresh new characters and a very compelling story. Let me know what you think of Dispatch thus far in the comments down below. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.